Thank you. Okay, so for a number of the assignments in this chapter, we're going to be doing troubleshooting. And the troubleshooting scenarios, here are the teams that I've created for you guys. So you don't have to worry about that. All you have to do is contact each other through using people. And one of you will be the client, one of you will be the tech. The clients will provide a fictitious name, address, phone number, and a make and model number of whatever component that is supposed to be broken. I will also provide you with different different troubleshooting scenarios. For the techs, I want you guys to document the client information and follow the 6 troubleshooting steps. And then you're going to document the questions and answers from the clients, and try and solve the problem. You're going to have to ask multiple open-ended questions, and so that they can describe the problem of how it happened, what apps they were using when it happened, or whatever. Then you're going to attempt to solve the problem, and complete the documentation. And your documentation should include each of the 6 troubleshooting steps and what you did at each step. And so let's see, one of them is fixing a hardware problem, and the next one's going to be fixing an operating system problem. One of them is going to be security, and one of them is going to be networking. So also for, as you can see, the next thing that came up was the 60-day practice tests. So instead of a practical final, which is normally what we usually do, a question and answer final and a practical final, I want you to do this 60-day practice tests and score an 80% or better, and then submit proof of your score for that. If you're scoring an 80% or better on these practice tests, then you are probably ready to take your certification exam. And that's like one of the main points of this course, is for you to get A+ certified. So it's something to think about. So we're going to have a final exam, which is going to include chapters 1 through 14. And we're also going to have this 60-day practice tests. And you can do the practice tests at your leisure anytime you want. I haven't figured out what we're doing with the final yet. I'm assuming I'm just going to open it up and have you guys complete it. And that will be during finals week on the 27th. Is the last day of class. Any questions yet?
Yeah, Linda, I have a question.
Yeah.
The practice or the 1 through 9, I think it says 1 through 9 checkpoint exam or something. That's not open.
Oh, okay. I'll open that.
Cool. Okay. And whatever was associated with it, I think there was a couple. If there's something else associated with it, maybe it wasn't open, or maybe it was just a test. Okay.
1 through 9. Was it a final?
I think it might be a final. Okay. I'm not sure if it said final or practice checkpoint.
I'll make sure. I'll go through and make sure that all of the exams are open.
It might have been said final on it though.
Okay. So I'll go through and make sure all of the exams are open, and I think for the final exam that won't be open yet, because the final exam you need to complete all of your coursework first. And then you also need to do the, there is a course, let me see. There's like a survey, where is it? Course feedback. So you have to do the course feedback before you can do the final exam. So, yeah. So you said 1 through 9. Huh. 1 through 9. Okay, I'll find that and see.
In the modules, it was like right after chapter 9.
Okay, thanks. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, right.
So it says
Okay.
final.
Okay. So yeah, I'm gonna open that up. That's not the actual final.
So I
Uh,
figured it was probably more of a checkpoint.
right,
Or
right. Okay.
okay.
I'll make sure that I open that up.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me
Yeah.
know.
Thanks.
Okay. So let's let me share. Let's get into chapter 14, the IT professional. And move some things around. Okay. So this is sort of a summation of, what some of the things that you need to think about as an IT professional. It gives you a lot of really good social interaction things. I love that there are a whole bunch of videos on what not to do, because that is so important. It is so important. For example, once upon a time, I was teaching health information technologies, and health information technology basically is, getting all of our doctors and our hospitals on electronic health records, right? So that if I get into an accident in North Carolina, they can pull up my health records. It isn't in a paper folder in California in my doctor's office, right? Which is really important. And so part of that is talking with doctors, and doctors they don't want to not understand and not know, and they don't like not being the smartest person in the room. So a good deal of that course was discussing with the techs how to communicate effectively with people who also are at a high level of education but don't understand technology, and talking with them in a way that you're not making them feel inferior, and you're not being rude to them. So yeah, that was communication skills are super important. And anytime that you are applying for a job or any of those kind of things, communication skills is the most important thing. That's what all of my advisory committee members have mentioned through the years, is the soft skills. You need to know how to communicate effectively. You need to be able to communicate respectfully. And so this is extremely important, because this isn't just fixing stuff, right? This is a service. It's customer service. And with customer service comes smiling when somebody's being a twit,
Yep.
Also, you may end up with a somewhat knowledgeable client who might who might say, oh, I think the problem is this. And well, if you immediately go to what they think the problem is, then you're not following your own troubleshooting scenarios, and it may not be that at all. So you're wasting a whole bunch of time, with working on what the client thinks the problem is, when technically you are the professional. You know the proper things to go through to find out what the problem is. So asking questions. And that also includes, developing a rapport with the person that's on the phone with you, right? If you're doing a help desk technician and you're on the phone, which a vast majority of what you're going to be doing is going to be remote. Rarely do you have bench technicians very often anymore where somebody's going to bring you a piece of equipment and you're fixing it. You know, a lot of times it's going to be, you're going to be logging into their computer using TeamViewer or using the Windows remote desktop and communicating with them. So you need to develop good communication skills, troubleshooting, and professional behavior. So we're going to talk about communication skills, operational procedures. Different businesses are going to have different policies, and you have to follow those policies, regardless of whether or not you think they're dumb. You need to document everything. We're also going to talk about change management, which is really important too, because change management, when you make a change in an environment, you can create unexpected results. We'll talk about ethical and legal issues that can arise, and we'll talk about government regulations that have to be adhered to and audits and that kind of stuff. And then we'll also talk about, you know, call center technicians. So what are your responsibilities, and how do you escalate problems? How do you fill out a ticket? I would strongly suggest that, I would strongly suggest that there's this great tool called Spiceworks, and it's help desk technician software. And so I would strongly suggest that you become familiar with that, you know, download a trial version of it and play with it a little bit so that you know how to operate it. It's pretty important because most companies are not going to have you writing things down on a piece of paper. It's going to be, you're going to be using help desk software, which is also going to include, you know, billable hours. So how long were you working on a problem? So developing a relationship and communication skills. So, you know, most people who need a computer fix are probably feeling a lot of stress. Nobody's going to call you up and say, hey, I'm having a wonderful day. Just thought I'd say hello. You know, they're saying, oh my gosh, my computer doesn't work and it's all hitting the fan and I need some help. So if you can right off the bat establish a good rapport with the customer and try and get them to relax a little bit, take ownership of the problem, a relaxed customer is going to be able to provide you information that you need to determine the source of the problem and then fix it. So that's going to be very helpful. Okay, next. This is kind of interesting too. When you're talking with a person, you know, face to face, you can see each other's body language, right? You can see if somebody's scowling. If you ask them a question and they're offended or something, you can tell because you can see their faces. So a problem is when you're talking with a customer over the phone, the customer can hear your tone and inflection, and they can tell whether or not you're smiling. And isn't that weird? But you can hear a smile in someone's voice. And if you're smiling on the phone, even if you're kind of faking it, it's helpful because that comes through the wire and it sort of allows the other person to relax a little bit. I'm not saying that you should be telling jokes or anything like that because your client is going to say this is not a joking matter, but you need to smile when you're talking to people on the phone, and don't take it personally. You know, you're there to help. So some call center technicians use a mirror at their desk to monitor their facial expressions, because, you know, really when I'm getting annoyed, and you can hear that I'm getting annoyed, right? As opposed to just smiling and relaxing. So know, relate, and understand. first thing you want to do is find out what the person's name is. I want you to ask them how to spell their name, because that's really important. And you shouldn't assume that Smith is spelled S-M-I-T-H when it could be S-M-Y-T-H-E. And people get offended when you misspell their name. So, find out what their name is, ask them for the proper spelling, ask them what they want to be called by you, right? But don't automatically assume that because someone says, oh, my name is Jack Moreland, that I want to be called Jack. Okay, sorry, Jack. Relate, so create some sort of one-on-one connection between you and the customer. I'm not saying, tell them your life history or anything like that, but, try and find some way of connecting that it makes it more human. Understand, let them know that you understand how frustrating it is to have their computer not working properly, and that you're going to do whatever you can to help them out. But don't forget that you are in control of the call. Understand. So somebody who is new with computers, all they know is that it doesn't work. I don't know, it doesn't work. Well, what do you mean what it doesn't work? What doesn't work? Did you try turning it off and turning it back on again? Are the lights on your monitor? Are the lights on in your computer? Is the power strip turned on? Is it an application that wasn't functioning properly? Is it a printer? What doesn't work? And you need to patiently and slowly go through all those questions to try and find out what the problem is. Has the computer been moved from one place to the other? Has somebody else used it? Has new hardware or software been installed? All of those things are really important. And try and not over talk the client. Don't use a whole bunch of BS, jargon, because that doesn't help them at all. Active listening. So you want to make sure that you get the whole story out of the customer, right? And if they're not giving you, all the things that you need, ask them more questions. Make sure that you say, that you understand. Oh, really? Okay. So what you're saying is, in all honesty, your open-ended questions, and once you've listened to the customer explain the problem, you want to summarize back, mirror back to the customer what they just said, so that they can correct any misconceptions that you might have. And then do some follow-up questions. So your follow-up questions should be targeted, closed-ended questions based on whatever information you've already gathered. Closed-ended questions should focus on obtaining specific information, and they should be able to answer closed-ended questions with a simple yes or no, or with, Windows 10 or OS X, or, something like that. Just remember that these people are going to be frustrated. So active listening and summarizing, lots of videos on what not to do. Please, oh, please listen, watch these videos, because they're wonderful. When I was teaching BCIS 33, which I did for a couple of semesters, and that was mainly to see whether or not I wanted to have that integrated into our class. A lot of what I would show are videos of job interviews, and job interviews that, like, what not to do on a job interview. And it's really important to really see some of the things that, like, oh, this is definitely not what I should do. So active listening. Using professional behavior with the customer. You don't want to minimize the customer's problems. If you do say, have you tried turning it off and turning it on again? Don't say it snarky, right? Say, oh, would you please, reboot the computer? Don't use abbreviations, acronyms, slang. Don't use a negative attitude or tone of voice. If you you like doing tech, right? So otherwise you wouldn't be taking these classes. So remember that you like doing this, and users are an integral part. They're your job security. So be nice to your users because they are your job security. Culturally insensitive remarks, that's, you need to definitely keep things very, very PC, just because that's what you need to do. It's professional. Don't forget that you are not only yourself, but you are representing your company. Don't be judgmental or insulting, when, with the caller. You're going to end up with some people who don't know what the start button is, right? So in those instances, you're better off trying to remotely fix their system. Don't talk to coworkers about unrelated subjects when you're talking to customers. Don't put people on hold for extended periods of time. Ask them, do you mind if I put you on hold? Do you mind if I transfer you? What is your phone number, just in case you get disconnected during the transfer, so that I can, and here is your ticket number. But yeah, you definitely need to be very polite. Be very polite. Also, don't talk shit about other companies. Okay. I mean, if somebody says, oh, well, I brought this to Best Buy, and, and I shouldn't be using Best Buy, but I brought this to company Z, and they said that I needed this, and it's still not fixed. Don't badmouth other companies ever. So there's some good information about putting people on hold and transferring calls. It's very important. But make sure that you ask, do you mind if I put you on hold, or just one moment? Just make sure that you've got a good rapport, and that you're not doing this rudely. And thank them for their patience while they were on hold. And explain to them, if it takes a long time, pick up the phone, say, I'm sorry, it's taking a little bit longer. Do you mind holding a little bit? I'm working on this. That's perfectly acceptable. And transferring the call, you want to definitely, don't interrupt the customer. Make sure that you have an explanation of why you're transferring it. And do you mind if I transfer the call? I mean, it's just some of those basic polite things, what not to do on hold and transfer. So another good video. Please make sure that you watch that. Keeping your customer focused. So your customer call focus. So use proper language. Be clear. Avoid technical language that the customer doesn't understand. Listen and ask more questions. Use open-ended and closed-ended questions to learn more details about the customer's problem. Give feedback. Let the customer know that you understand the problem, and develop a friendly and positive, conversation. You might end up with, little old Aunt Millie, who's, been under quarantine for the last, month and a half, and hasn't had anybody to talk to, so try and be patient with Aunt Millie while she's talking her ear off about her 5 cats, but try and make sure that you bring the conversation back around to, fixing the computer. Talkative customers. So a lot of times you're going to have as I said, Aunt Millie. I mean, she just wants to socialize. She's lonely. Here's a video on what not to do with those types of people. And rude customers, you're going to get rude customers. And so you definitely want to use professional behavior when you're managing rude customers. But don't forget, nobody's going to call you because it's a wonderful day and everything's fine. They're frustrated. Um, you're going to have a knowledgeable customer, and so there's a video on what not to do uh, with a knowledgeable customer. And an angry customer. You're always going to get an angry customer. So how to manage that, and don't ever take any of this stuff personally. Inexperienced customers, I can't, what's the start button? I don't know. What do you mean, is it plugged in? Which wire? There's so many wires back here. Oh my gosh, I don't know. Operational procedures. So there should be a standard order of operation regarding, the procedures that you're going to be using. And the reason why we have documentation is so that you've got, good information about the products and software and hardware functions. It reduces confusion and mistakes and saves time and resources. A lot of times our documentation may be because of governmental or industry regulations. And if that's the case, you had better comply. And maybe you need documentation for training new employees or customers. So we need to establish rules and restrictions regarding the organization's assets, like personal use, your computer usage policy, acceptable use policy for internet and network and the computer. some of the documents. So if you're in a really small organization, if it's like just a little real estate office, maybe they don't have any policy. They're going to have a whole bunch of their own real estate agents that are all independent contractors. So there is no boss, technically. There's a broker. So in that instance, you still need some sort of acceptable use policy on how your technology is going to be utilized. And regulatory compliance, that kind of stuff. How are things saved? Do we need to use encryption for saving things and for transmitting things? What about personally identifiable information? So all of those things need to be documented and stuck to. What happens if someone is not following the rules? Your disaster recovery policies, and we'll talk about that down the road because that's really important. So project documents. So if there's changes or updates or new services, we need to know all about that and what changes that's going to provide. And normally if there's change, there's going to be some change management forms by the analyst that documents and researches all of the effects of these changes on the organization, whether it's on the organization's data or on the organization's workflow or something like that. But that's all really important. And regulatory compliance requirements. So there's lots of government regulations. There's Sarbanes-Oxley, and there's HIPAA, and there's all kinds of documentation that are government regulations to protect consumers and industries and data. So some of the regulations may have implications on internal company processes and procedures. Some may require extensive record keeping regarding how the data is accessed and being used. And you need to make sure that you're complying with those laws and regulations, because if you don't, there could be severe consequences, including fines, termination of employment, or even incarceration of offenders. So yeah, if you're taking Security Plus and you have a job as a tech, no, you can't pen test just because you want to, right? You can't even do it under the guise of you're doing it to make sure everything's secure. Anytime you're doing penetration testing or security testing, there needs to be documentation. There needs to be a specific scope of what you're allowed to touch and what you're not allowed to touch, and how much information you're allowed to do. And it's very detailed, and it is in, it's a legal documentation signed by both you and the company that's hiring you. And yes, you need to make sure that you have permission and a complete understanding of the scope of what you're allowed to touch and look at. If you're working internally at an organization and you have security skills, if you want to test some new software that the developers just did, you want to make sure that you always ask for permission in writing from a higher up, right? And tell them exactly what you are doing, why you're doing it, and when you're doing it, and all of that. Because, and, you know, or ask them when would be the best time and the reasons why. All of these things are really important things to go through. So change control. So here's an example of a change control worksheet. And normally, of course, these aren't pieces of paper, but change management definitely requires, you know, a lot of proper planning. And it could be something as simple as adding, you know, switching to a new software vendor, to maybe the company just bought a bigger facility and we're moving everything to that bigger facility. Well, there's a big difference in how much you're going to have to research and figure out and document for new software versus moving your entire business to a different location. So change management, definitely it requires proper planning. It has to go through the chain of command and should be approved at every level. You can't just bring it upon yourself to revise processes because you think this is going to be faster or easier, because changes can lead to security vulnerabilities or legal liabilities that you might not have thought of. So a lot of times, we've all been in organizations where there's a process to do something, and you're going through this and it's like, this is a stupid process. Why do I need to go through all of these steps to manage this process? And the reason is because somebody at a higher level analyzed this and determined that this is the best way of following through with that change control process. So it is very important. Disaster recovery. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And a data disaster, if it's handled properly, will not be a resume generating event for you. There should be a disaster recovery plan. It should clearly specify each team member's duties and responsibilities. Once there's a plan in place, you should do a tabletop exercise, and that's a practice run with all of the team members participating, and that's going to be timed. That way you can look at how long it took to recover from this, you know, disaster. And then your disaster recovery plan and documentation can be reviewed and tested annually and then revised to make things smoother. It's also important to have a current inventory and vendor contact list. So there's lots of things, you know, and there's so many different disasters, like how do you plan for everything, right? I don't think, well, okay, so I think let's talk about the coronavirus, right? And the number of people that are working remotely now. I think in our area in particular, for example, at the county level, I think they were already, they already had some plans in place because we already had the dam, the problems with the dam and that evacuation, which meant that a lot of their people had to work remotely, right? And with the power outages, you know, for the school. A lot of instructors should have been prepared, you know, in the case of power outages, how to communicate with their students and work remotely. I think those instances were close enough together. I mean, I think that power outages were such a short term thing that I think a lot of the instructors that didn't want to go to a remote learning environment probably just emailed students and gave them assignments that way, and didn't actually jump in with both feet. Whereas now we have to have, you know, a remote learning plan and procedure in place. And right now, as a part of the distance learning committee, we're helping to set up a form and a checklist for our instructors to know what they need to do in order to provide quality instruction remotely. Because this past semester has been kind of like, oh crap, you know, we don't know what to do. We have nothing in place, and just do the best that you can. There were no standards regarding instruction quality. Whereas if it's an online class, there are specific requirements for quality control. Okay, I'm back from left field now. So lots of different things, you know, services might be available, might not be available. Something to think of is cloud resources. So your cloud resources are great if you if you're having, you know, some sort of disaster like the fires, right, in Paradise. If you had cloud resources, then your company could continue. Whereas if they were just on-prem, maybe not. But also the cloud resources, if you're all cloud resources, then what happens if your network goes down? Are you going to have everyone just sitting around twiddling their thumbs? So you need some sort of backup for that. Your web services, they're pretty easy because most of that is cloud-based these days. And if you pay extra for your web services and for your database servers in the cloud, they will geolocate it so that if one area goes down, another one comes up. Your Active Directory and authentication services, right? So we all had problems single sign-on with MyBC, right? Because that went down. If that's the one cog that goes down, and that's housed on-prem, which it is at Butte College, when AT&T cut, when that fiber optic cable got cut, we couldn't sign on to and authenticate to our cloud resources. So we could probably still get to our cloud resources, but we couldn't authenticate, so we couldn't get to them. So that was the single point of failure there. So we're trying to prevent single points of failure. We're trying to minimize downtime. You need to, you know, part of your disaster prevention and recovery should be considering what are mission critical resources that we need redundancy with. Backups, 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 backups. You are going to hear that out of me through every single class. Backups are so important because if you've got everything backed up, you can bring everything back. And if you are familiar with recovery and recovering databases or recovering your servers or whatever, then you're going to have limited downtime, which means that, yes, you're probably going to be able to keep your job because you did due diligence by backing everything up. And now all of a sudden you're the lifesaver because yay. So that's where you want to be. You don't want to be the person that's learning how to restore a backup in the middle of a disaster. That's not the time to learn. You should be very familiar with this and test your backups and test your recovery procedures so that you know it like the back of your hand. Because during a disaster, people forget things. They get anxious. They forget things. And if you don't follow the checklist and do things the way and be familiar with all the things, then it's going to take longer to recover. So you can either do cloud backups or local backups. So our elements of a disaster recovery plan. So we've got our network design recovery strategy. So what do we do with our routers and our switches, or our default gateway? Inventory and documentation. You should have inventory of all of your equipment, and there's software that'll crawl your network and do that inventory for you. Yay. Also, with the documentation on your inventory, it should include any service level agreements that you have with the vendors for that equipment. It should also include the software versions on that equipment. Verification, we should have approval and implementation. So we're going to have everything verified. We're going to get it approved by somebody higher up. And then we're going to review the disaster recovery plan. And as I said, it is really important to do tabletop, and they are called tabletop exercises, where you get everybody that's involved together and make sure that everybody knows what their jobs are. And what do we do if, in the unlikelihood that one of those people is missing, who's going to take over that person's job? Because recovering from a disaster is not a one person deal. Ethical and legal considerations. Ooh, lots of those. And I'm hoping that that in all the security classes that you are going through a lot of the legal and ethical considerations. Your main job, of course, is going to be to protect data. Protecting data also includes people's personally identifiable information, or their health records, or their taxes, or their visa number. So your main job is to protect the data. When somebody allows you into their computer, it's as personal as looking through their underwear drawer, right? I mean, think about it. What have you got on your computer? You've got taxes, you've got pictures, you've got movies, you got all kinds of stuff. You should not, as a tech, you should not snoop around. You shouldn't copy music files. You shouldn't load unlicensed software, and that's just the beginning of some of the things that you shouldn't do. But there's lots of legal and ethical considerations. Personally identifiable information, so names, maiden names, alias, social security numbers, passport number, driver's license number, you know, all those stupid quizzes like, ooh, what kind of Lord of the Rings character are you? They're asking, they are social engineering, you know, answers to, you know, whether or not you have a dog and what's the dog's name, or what's your favorite team, or, you know, and those are, a lot of times those are security questions, right? So you really need to make sure that you are protecting any personally identifiable information. So you need to think about legal liability. You want to cover CYA and CYCA. So that would be CY, your client's A. And if you don't know what CYA is, please just Google it. But you definitely need to make sure that you're you know, doing everything legally properly. PCI DSS standards, and that covers all the rules regarding the payment card industry, and that includes encryption, storage, and transmission of card numbers. So there's a whole bunch of regulations regarding PCI DSS. You should be very familiar with that. PHI, your protected health information. So here we've got electronic records, as I was mentioning earlier. HIPAA is the government regulations that safeguard your health data, and all health providers are required to comply with HIPAA rules. So you need to make sure that there aren't any actions that you are taking that are going to, you know, make anybody's PHI or PII vulnerable. So one of your labs is going to be investigating breaches of PII, PHI, and PCI. So that's a good lab for you guys to do. That's research. I'd like some specifics, please, and don't just give me a link. I want you to actually, read about the breach, what caused the breach, what business was affected, what information was released, and the date of the breach. So there's lots of legal considerations in IT. You always need to ask permission before you make changes. You can't access a customer's or coworkers' accounts, private files, or emails without permission. It's not permissible to install, copy, or share digital content. It's not permissible to make a customer's use a customer's IT resources for commercial purposes. So you can't. Oh, you just got a brand new server and you've got all these resources. You can't put your own personal website on that server, okay? Or you can't contract out those resources either. You can't use those resources for torrenting, as for seeds for torrents, or to download software or any of that other stuff. I mean, there's specific requirements. You cannot use a company's resources for illegal activities. So that includes obscenity, pornography, threats, harassment, copyright infringement, internet piracy, university trademark infringement, defamation, theft, identity theft, or allow unauthorized access. So lots of regulations here that you really need to make sure that you're complying with. So let's talk about licensing. So I prefer open source software, mainly because it's free. But the problem is who's that software coming from? So you need to make sure that you're looking at the reputation of the business that is, or the people that have made the software. Particularly if you're looking in security stuff, if you're looking at some of the software tools that are available out there, there may be a software tool that that you get from a disreputable source that could actually just bot your system. And so you're no longer part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. So let's talk about licensing. So it's illegal to use licensed software without the appropriate license. So a personal software license is an end user license agreement, the EULA, and an enterprise license is software license that the company has for its employees to use, and usually there's a volume licensing agreement with that. Open source licensing is a copyright license for software that allows developers to modify and share the source code that runs the software. So there's lots of different things to consider there. For computer forensics, so when we're collecting and analyzing data for this purpose, it's called computer forensics. The process of computer forensics encompasses both IT and the legal realm to ensure that any data collected has to be admissible as evidence in court. So that means that that we have to make sure that we have a chain of custody, that things haven't been altered. We have proof that things haven't been altered. Some of the things that we have to think about is not turning something off. So we've got different types of data. We've got persistent data, and that's on the local hard drive or an optical drive or a flash drive, right? So when the computer's turned off, the data is preserved, it's still there. But there's volatile data, there's RAM, right? And there's cache and the registries inside of your CPU. Those contain volatile data. And data in transit between storage medium and the CPU is also volatile data. So if you're reporting illegal activity or you're part of an incident response team, it's important to know how to capture this data because it disappears as soon as the computer is turned off. So that, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's gone. The evidence is gone. Cyber law explains the circumstances under which evidence can be collected, data evidence can be collected. And that's whether it's from computers or data storage devices or networks or wireless communications. It can also specify the manner in which the data can be collected. So there are specific requirements regarding the methodology for collecting data when it comes to cyber activity. First response, so that's the first person on the scene. If you're that person that first discovers any illegal activity, do not turn the computer off because you've got volatile data about the current state of the computer. And that can include the programs that are running, the network connections that are open, the IP address of the connection. That's way important. The users who are logged into the network or to the computer. And all of that data helps to determine a logical timeline of the security incident. And it can also help to identify those responsible for the illegal activity. So you don't want to just rely on your log files for this information. You need to make sure that you've got, that you've protected all the data and that it can be utilized. Documentation, documentation, documentation. When it comes to any illegal activity, precise documentation and following the chain of custody is going to determine whether or not the activity is prosecutable, right, or traceable. So it's very important. So if you discover illegal activity, you need to document the initial reason for accessing the computer or network, the time and date, peripherals that are connected, all network connections, the physical area that it's located, the illegal material that you found. So maybe you're working on somebody's computer and you find a bunch of child porn. It's your responsibility, and it is your legal responsibility to make sure that that is not ignored. For chain of custody, so we need to make sure that we're protecting the integrity of the data and of the evidence. So incorporate computer forensics procedure. You want to incorporate computer forensics procedures into your approach to computer network security so that you can ensure the integrity of the data. And that would mean, you know, creating, using the proper tools to create a clone, to do hashes on hard drives to ensure that it hasn't been altered. And there's specific procedures and tools that are permissible for those legal uses. These procedures can help you capture any necessary data in the event of a network breach, and that ensures the viability and the integrity of the captured data, and, you know, to help you persecute the intruder. So call center technicians. So level 1 technicians are basically going to answer the first calls. They're going to answer the calls in the order that the calls arrive. So if a level 1 technician can't solve the problem, then it's going to be escalated to a level 2 technician. The technician has to supply the level of support that's outlined in the customer service level agreement, or the SLA. So anybody's going to have an SLA with you. There's a number of managed service providers. One in particular in Chico is Strati. Another one would be Computer Associates. So there's a couple of, there's quite a few of them. For our call centers, if you're working in a call center, you're going to have a specific software to log and track your incidents. Don't forget, you have to record your contact information, the product information, run diagnostic utilities. And if you look at those things, those kind of go right along with your 6 troubleshooting steps, right? Run diagnostic utilities, research a knowledge base if you haven't fixed it already, and then collect customer feedback. You know, make sure that if it's fixed, the customer is going to verify that it's fixed. So your customer information, your contact information, make sure that you repeat things back to the customer so that you didn't get something wrong or misunderstand. So make sure that you ask how to spell their name, repeat back their phone number, their billing address, manufacturer and model of the computer, what operating system the computer is using. Is the computer plugged into the wall or running on battery? So obviously that's a laptop. Is it on a network? Is it wired or wireless? So these are all like really important questions to ask. And then a description of the problem. And the priority of the problem is really important too. It's like, for example, if you have two customers and one of them is an accounting firm and it's April 14th, or let's say it's June 14th, since taxes were pushed forward, and they're having computer issues, their priority is going to be way higher than someone who is just you know, a computer user who's got a laptop. They had a problem updating or something, right? So there's big, huge difference between business continuity and importance. How critical is it to the business's infrastructure? That's a huge importance. For example, what if it's a web server and their main income is e-commerce, right? So they need that web server in order to get customers and sell widgets. So it's important. Our level 2 technician responsibilities. So our level 2 technician responsibilities is going to take all of the information that the level 1 tech got, along with all the questions and answers that the level 1 tech got, and then dig a little bit deeper. You need to make sure that you write down the questions and answers that you asked, simply because the level 2 technician shouldn't be asking the same questions. Not only is it a waste of time and money, but it also annoys the heck out of the user, right? So a lot of things these days are going more towards scripting. So, and one of the main reasons is because we want to automate processes so that we can, so that it makes it easier for us. Also, when we're automating processes, we can schedule things so that they run automatically. And we don't have to think about, oh, gee, I forgot, did I do that backup, or did I you know, do a specific maintenance thing. So it is really important to be familiar with different scripting environments, Bash and PowerShell and the command line, and Python. So you should know different scripting languages. And the reason why I said Python is because Python quite frequently is being utilized to, you know, create scripts that will run processes for you and make things just way more efficient and way easier. So scripting is really important. So part of your labs are going to be to create scripts. And so here's a bash file. So here we're looking at a bash script, and basically, so we're in a Linux environment. And yes, Linux is sort of integrated into Windows now, sort of on a different level. But you need to be familiar with some bash scripting. Quite frequently, any web resources that you have in the cloud or database resources that you have in the cloud may be sitting on and hosted on a Linux machine. So get familiar with Linux, please. So different scripted languages, sometimes you can tell by the extension, right? So a Windows bash file is a .bat, a PowerShell is PS, a Linux shell script would be .sh, a VB script would be VBS, a Java JS, Python would be .py. So be familiar with those things. It is imperative that you develop a programming knowledge, and don't just stick with just one thing. So our different commands that we can use under different instances, sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. So with Windows, CD is change directory. It's the same thing in Linux, right? With making a directory, it could be mkdir, same thing. So with a Windows batch file, CLS clears the screen or clear. So there's lots of similarities with commands, and make sure that you know how to maneuver around whatever environment that you're working in. Some basics of programming: know what variables are and different types of variables. There's environmental variables that are global, and then there are other variables that are for specific things. Conditional statements, so equal, not equal, if or, greater than, less than, else if, or if then. So there's lots of basic conditioning statements. I'm assuming that most of you have either already taken CSCI4 or are taking it now. And so this should be quite familiar to you. It is very important that you have this skill set. And there are lots of, you know, if you want to learn more, there's lots of YouTube videos on PowerShell, doing deep dives on how to create PowerShell scripts. There's deep dives on Python. So learn how to deal with Python, and how to create and automate processes using Python. Yeah, so one of your labs is going to be write some basic scripts in different languages so that you can differentiate and compare and contrast the different syntaxes, because you're trying to do the same thing in all of these different environments, but each language is going to have its own syntax. So once you understand the structural theory of an if-else statement, or if-then, then you can figure out how to do it in any language, because we have the Googles. So we went through a lot, huh? We went through communication is super important. How to manage and how to manage change and unplanned disruptions. Appropriate behavior. Please make sure that you watch all those videos. Call center environment and different technicians' responsibilities. All the legal requirements in the IT world. Different scripting environments. So yeah, there's a lot going on in this chapter.